we have a zero-tolerance policy for any form of harassment, any kind of bullying, any kind of discrimination.
Tonight, the Assembly of First Nations moves to suspend one of its members for inappropriate behavior.
It's really just about spreading the word and knowing that we're not all alone.
And a group of youth in the Northwest Territories are putting up signs across Yellowknife to help kids. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The annual general meeting for the Assembly of First Nations started off with an internal struggle. Chiefs from across the country are in Fredericton, New Brunswick, celebrating 40 years of work. But the meeting started out with an announcement that the executive of the AFN got together Sunday and is proposing to suspend one of its members. APTN's Amber Bernard is in Fredericton and has more.
It's day one at the annual general meeting for the Assembly of First Nations, and it's off to a rough start. The AFN Executive Committee, that includes National Chief Perry Bellegarde, voted to suspend Nova Scotia and Newfoundland Regional Chief Morley Gugu.
Well, again, at the Assembly of First Nations, we have a zero-tolerance policy for any form of harassment, any kind of bullying, any kind of discrimination. So we take things very seriously. And as leaders, we're held to a higher standard. And so when things come up, we have a board of directors, we have a national executive. And so we take things there for direction. And that's where that direction was given and was made and was implemented.
The decision comes after an investigation conducted last year alleged Gugu engaged in gender-based discrimination. Former president of the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, Cheryl Maloney, stated in that report she was harassed by Gugu. APTN reached out to multiple chiefs who declined to comment, including the AFN Women's Council. But one AFN Youth Council member says she has faith in the Executive Council for setting the right tone.
Especially when it comes to harassment or, even on the terms of sexual harassment as well, that we do not tolerate anything like this at all. And it's something it has been, been enforced, just this past week. But I think it's really empowering to see, our leaders at this regional and executive level taking those stances.
Gugu has 20 days to respond to the AFN's proposed suspension. We reached out to the regional chief for comment, but did not hear back. Gugu told APTN Friday that he was heading to Peru with students for an event and would not be at the AFN meeting. AFN was forced to discipline another chief. Alan Polchi of St. Mary's First Nation was charged with assault and sexual assault. The AFN removed his speech from the schedule for the opening ceremonies. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Fredericton.
One of the commissioners for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls says during testimony they heard many people speak out about inappropriate behavior from people in leadership roles. Michelle Audet says the collateral damage for speaking up can be huge. For more, we're joined by the former commissioner. Thanks for joining us. We're nearly 2 months out from the release of the National Inquiry's final report. Were you expecting more action on the calls for justice, and are you worried it's already being forgotten?
Well, I was already, anxious during the inquiry, and knowing that we will go through a federal election and some provincial government will be changed or more conservative. So yes, I was concerned, and I'm still concerned. So every day for me, it's where any government, any organization has to do something. So I think it's going to be like this forever for me.
The Assembly of First Nations has proposed suspending a regional chief over allegations of harassment. The chief of St. Mary's First Nation was taken off the AFN agenda as he faces charges of sexual assault. The Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs has taken a leave of absence amid allegations of inappropriate messaging. Is this the type of behavior from leaders something the National Inquiry was hearing?
Well, to be honest, we did hear stories or truth coming from women, girls, Indigenous people, but it was, I have to be honest, in camera, the big majority, because of the concern, the security, or being afraid to speak out for their safety and the safety of their family. But they didn't say a specific chief, but yes, they did mention about some people in power or in a leadership position.
So as I was saying, you know, we also have NWAC, the Native Women's Association of Canada, is in turmoil. Does all of this worry you when it comes to pushing for the implementation of the calls for justice?
Where it worries me, it's more how any government can use this to say, well, why should we push something with this organization is happening, when I strongly believe that the grassroots communities or the movement, the people across Canada, the allies, have that power and the magic or the push to make sure that the government, the federal, maybe the next new government or the same government in the fall, but all provinces and territory has to do something.
What advice do you have for the grassroots, regular folks, to continue to keep the pressure on to make these calls for justice a reality?
Well, let's take all summer, this summer, what's left for this summer, to read, to absorb, to digest, to understand the call for justice that came from the truth of the women and men who spoke up. And from that, make sure that we challenge every day all government, all organization or people that wants to do something, to make sure that there's a small or a huge step that it's taking by those organizations. So it's a personal but also a collective responsibility.
Ms. Audette, we'll have to leave it there, but do appreciate you taking some time for us.
Merci. Au revoir.
To Vancouver, where a judge has reserved her decision to grant a First Nations man bail after he has spent nearly 4 decades in jail for a crime he says he didn't commit. Philip Talio was convicted in the sexual assault and murder of toddler Delavina Mack in 1983. The judge held her decision until a later date. Talio's lawyer is proposing he stay in a supervised residence once released. The Crown objected to the plan presented, citing public safety concerns. Talio was 17 years old when a previous lawyer entered a guilty plea in the case. He's maintained his innocence ever since. He's launched a review of his conviction, which is set to take place next year. Outside the courthouse, Talio's lawyer had this to say.
Justice Bennett has said, come back and give us more information about the transitional housing place that Mr. Talio would be going to in the event that he's granted bail. So we still have some more information to gather, and then hopefully we'll get that information and present it to the court, and then Justice Bennett will make her decision.
Residents of Akwesasne, Mohawk Territory, have filed a class action against Canada Border Services Agency and the Attorney General of Canada, alleging mistreatment at the Canada-U.S. border. If approved, community members may be compensated. Lead plaintiff Jody Swamp was arrested by CBSA officers in 2017 while crossing from Cornwall Island to the city of Cornwall in Ontario. While he was eventually acquitted, the lawsuit alleges that most Akwesasne residents have experienced discrimination, detention, or search and seizures at border checkpoints while traveling domestically.
People on Cornwall Island have to go to Cornwall sometimes 5 or 6 times a day. Anything from doctor's appointments to going to eat to the most basic of human tasks. And every time they do that, they have to go through the border, and there's this fear that exists of what's going to happen every time. What's going to happen to me when I go through the border in a country that I've never left?
Youth in Yellowknife are displaying their messages of positivity. That story and more still to come. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Sunny and 26 for Fredericton, 22 in Charlottetown. Rain in Nain with a high of 10, 20 for Cartwright and Happy Valley Goose Bay. 26 under the sun in Montreal, 19 and sunny for Chibougamau. 26 in Toronto, London, and Sarnia. 25 with showers in Ottawa. 29 with rain in Thunder Bay. Sun's out in Sioux Lookout with a high of 28. 32 with showers for Puckatawagan, Thompson, and the Paw. A high of 30 in Winnipeg, Gimli, Princess Harbor, Barons River, and Dauphin. In Saskatchewan, rain, and 28 for Saskatoon, Regina, and Estevan. 30 under sunny skies in Uranium City, 30 with rain in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. Nunavut's wildlife boards have decided on 4 of the 5 communities that will be able to harvest a bowhead whale this summer. Those 4 communities are Coral Harbour, Naujac, Aglulik, and Pawn Inlet. Inuit were prevented from hunting bowhead for 20 years following a collapse in the stocks due to commercial whaling. A limited hunt was introduced in the 1990s. The massive mammals can be 60 feet in length and 100 tons in weight. Just imagine a school bus-sized whale. The meat will be distributed in the hunt communities and their neighboring towns. After nearly 2 decades, the final agreement for a massive park reserve in the Northwest Territories is set to be signed this summer. But the park does have some controversy because some Indigenous groups say they've been left out of the consultations. The core of the Tai-Dene National Park Reserve would be protected under Parks Canada. The outlying land would be cared for by the territorial government. But the Northwest Territories Métis Nation is opposing the park because they say the land the territorial government would handle would be closed to mining, and that would kill potential economic benefits.
We're talking about building the economy, and to take away another 13,000 square kilometers of land in a prime area where there's development potential, and to offer us nothing. When you're talking about consultation, it also means accommodate. You're going to take away an opportunity like that. They need to put out a package that our people are going to benefit from.
Youth in Yellowknife are fighting negative feelings with positive messages. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs caught up with a group of teens who have launched a new campaign around mental health for youth by youth. Here's that story.
They are on a mission to make a statement. The Tree of Peace Youth Committee want Yellowknifers to know that if they are feeling sad, they aren't alone. This July, the 8-member group has been on a suicide prevention campaign as a way to inform about tragedy.
Well, we did it in memory of our close friend who we lost to suicide. And so it's really just about spreading the word and knowing that we're not all alone.
Cheyenne Larocque is 16 and has been working through her own healing.
Well, that's something that I struggle with, is being open about it, because I don't like sharing my story and then not getting any of the help that I needed out of it.
The Science feature NWT help phone lines alone with other resources.
I guess the problem is not everybody knows all the support systems, so our campaign's to inform people.
When the youth first came forward with a plan, there was a sense of urgency. They were told they would have to wait for a 2-week appeal process through the city. Instead, they asked businesses and started work right away.
You matter.
You matter?
Yeah.
Why is that one your favorite?
First of all, because probably most people don't know that they matter and they think no one cares.
Hi, we're doing a campaign for suicide prevention. Do we have permission to put this up in your lawn?
Of course you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Danny Larocque, who is 11 years old, says she thinks the peer-to-peer approach will be effective.
Probably most people don't listen to adults because I don't know. But if it comes from someone like your own age, then you'd probably listen more.
Michelle Larocque with the Tree of Peace says more youth are joining the committee and want to bring healing workshops to the north.
They're the ones that really drive this committee, you know, so when it comes to the programs that they want, like the assertiveness training, and they're starting to honor their own feelings and their truths and just speak on them.
10 signs have gone up so far, and a suicide intervention training day is being coordinated by the youth committee to run this fall. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
In the Yukon, the Champagne and Aishihik First Nations recently held their annual general meeting. One of the big topics was a project that's been in the works for nearly 40 years. It's one that could bring tourist dollars and jobs while keeping traditions alive. APTN's Chris McIntyre explains.
Build it and they will come. That is the goal of the Champagne and Aishihik First Nations, who are working towards building a multi-million-dollar tourism resort.
Any of the profits that we make would be somehow reinvested within our community.
Back in the 1980s, the Champagne and Aishihik First Nations negotiated the land near Kathleen Lake called Metetana for having a tourism venture. And now the Metetana Man Resort is another step closer to becoming a reality.
It's a proposed multi-million-dollar facility right here, just sort of around the corner. As the crow flies, you're just heading over there. One of the reasons why we chose Kathleen Lake was to sort of give an opportunity to highlight what actually the potential is here.
Nathan McCowan, who is Tlingit, traveled to Kathleen Lake from his home in Anchorage. McCowan thinks this project would be a good idea.
Fundamentally inside the notion of why the project will make sense is the draw for individuals to want to come and see a relatively pristine, relatively untouched, beautiful environment like this one. You know, the project, if it does come to fruition, I think is going to be managed with the utmost care and the perspective of making it a success, not for the next quarter and not for the next fiscal year, but for decades and decades to come.
The resort would provide jobs like guiding, teaching, cultural experiences, and maintenance to band members. The bands have done financial studies that show the resort would be a moneymaker, but there are still details to work out.
There are people who are, you know, they want to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's crossed. And then we have a whole bunch of people who are entrepreneurial and see some opportunity that could be created, but also see an opportunity for us to utilize one of our natural resources for a sustainable opportunity.
Champagne and Aishihik First Nation leaders say they plan to discuss the final stages of the project with members in the fall. Chris McIntyre, APTN National News, Kathleen Lake, Yukon.
An award-winning exhibit has stepped into the Canadian Museum of History. That story and more coming up after the break. Here's a look at the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Smoky and 31 for Fort Chipewyan. Rain and 28 in Medicine Hat. 21 with showers for Calgary. Rain and 23 in Victoria and Vancouver. 26 with showers for Kamloops. 17 in Dease Lake. Sunny and 19 for Smithers. 28 in Old Crow. A high of 16 with rain for Whitehorse. 25 and showers for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. 27 under the sun in Yellowknife. 29 for Norman Wells. Sunny and 5 for Sax Harbor. 27 for Fort McPherson. 11 in Baker Lake. 14 for Arviette and Whale Cove. 8 for Resolute and Arctic Bay. Welcome back. A unique Cree exhibition is on display at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau. Visitors to the exhibit are given a first-hand look at the cultural importance of walking. Annette Francis has more.
This award-winning exhibition is called Footprints, A Walk Through Generations. Museum director Jean-Marc Blais says it's an important showcase here.
And the reason why it's called Footprints is because it talks about how important it is for the Cree to, in their culture, to walk, you know, and in all seasons, and how important walking is not only a physical thing, but it's also a spiritual thing. And so this is a great discovery for most people coming to the museum here.
It's the first traveling exhibition developed by the Cree Cultural Institute in Ojibwe, Quebec, done in collaboration with elders from all 10 Cree communities in northern Quebec. There are over 150 artifacts, from hunting and trapping tools to moccasins, parkas, and gloves. Through the use of objects like these snowshoes and arts and crafts, the exhibit shares Cree stories and ceremonial practices that continue today.
It is an exhibition developed by the Indigenous community totally. And this is something that we feel as a national museum that is so important for Canada now. You cannot understand Canada without having exhibitions like this one that tells the story from the people that actually live it.
The exhibition will be on display at the Canadian Museum of History until November 3rd. According to Blais, the museum is working with the Cree Cultural Institute to keep the traveling display on the road. They're currently looking for more museums to host the exhibit. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Gatineau.
The Michif language is a unique language that was created by the Métis. Like many Indigenous languages, it's been a struggle to keep it alive and thriving. But starting this fall, one school board in Saskatoon will be offering the Michif language at one of their schools, and they plan to expand. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
The official language of the Métis, Michif, is in danger of going extinct, but it's getting help from the Greater Catholic School Division in Saskatoon, because this fall they will begin teaching Michif at one of their schools. Court Donier, the Métis Education Program Leader for Greater Catholic Schools, says the Michif language needs help surviving.
Right now, the people who are speaking Michif are people who are in that older generation, probably my age, who are speaking that language, and it's not being transmitted. So when they go, so will go the language. So there's relatively few speakers in comparison to languages around the world. Michif is extremely endangered.
St. Michael's School centers its cultural teachings around the Métis traditions. Now the Michif language will be part of their curriculum.
Our plans for the fall for Michif language instruction would be to start with core language programming, particularly at the kindergarten to grade 3 level. So we're starting with 100 minutes per week of instruction.
The goal is to have a bilingual Michif school and to expand the language to other schools. But first, the Greater Catholic School Division needs to find more Michif-speaking language instructors.
We would hope that we could attract and retain more fluent Michif teachers to come and work with us and to help us with our language programming.
This initiative aligns with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action to preserve Indigenous languages.
The Truth and Reconciliation and the calls to action, and there are specific calls to action, 10 and 13, that speak to the importance of our Indigenous languages and the responsibility of school divisions and the federal government to fund and make this available to students.
Starting in the fall, new Indigenous language courses will start being taught to high school students across Saskatchewan. Michif isn't on the curriculum yet, but once enough instructors are in place, the goal is to have the Michif language alive and well for generations to come. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Great initiative. Hopefully they find those instructors. And that's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For the latest on the AFN Assembly in Fredericton and much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.